Wilson, was it you? Good morning. How are you, buddy?
It was not me, but
Okay.
I think it probably means who's starting at quarterback.
Who is starting at quarterback, Wilson? Tell us now. Breaking news. Wilson Alexander from The Advocate said...
I wish I could say.
Oh!
I
Miles
don't.
Brennan.
I know. Obviously, I don't think a starter has been named just yet, but it seems maybe headed toward Jaden Daniels. He's of course been taking so many reps with the ones. Garrett Nussmeier by no means looks out of this competition, and he throws such a good ball. But Jaden has been getting a lot of those first team, sort of the first person to get those first team reps, and then they start splitting whenever we've been out at practice. And he looks a lot better than he did in the spring when he's getting those reps too.
How much of these competitions that are happening right now, offensive line, quarterback, defensive back, even place kicker, go into the season, in your opinion?
Ooh, that's a good question. Brian Kelly has never been afraid to change somebody at a position and move things around. When you look back at his track record, especially at quarterback during the season, offensive line seems like once they get that set, that might be barring injury or if those struggles with snapping really continue into the year. That seems like it would probably stay as whatever the starting five is, unless they really struggle or there's like some issue. Kicker could definitely probably be the one that changes the most. I mean, gosh, they do not seem to have a perfect option, to say the least, at kicker right now. I wouldn't be surprised if it, during the year both quarterbacks played. But yeah, there could definitely be some movement at the place kicker position if somebody doesn't begin to step up.
What do you make of that offensive line competition? I thought that he kind of dove a little into it after Wednesday's scrimmage, talking about wanting to see more from maybe Cam Wire and Charles Turner. What did that tell you about the competition? Even Emory Jones' name, he keeps slipping in there.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a call to say to those guys like, hey, you still got a chance. Make sure you continue to compete. They want that. Brad Davis's whole thing ever since he got here was competition on the offensive line, never wanting to let anybody get complacent. So even though they've had sort of the same starting five, Will Campbell at left tackle, Tremont Shorts at left guard, Dellinger at center, Frazier at right guard, and Anthony Bradford at right tackle for most of camp at this point, they don't want anybody to get to sort of rest. And so those competitions, they're going to make sure that they keep going to not let anybody get complacent back there. So, Cam Wire, of course, especially with him being a senior with the amount of experience that he has, really the only somewhat returning starter on this whole offensive line, want to make sure that he could still have a chance. See Anthony Bradford inside because he's got that experience at guard, kind of see what that looks like before they actually decide, okay, this is our starting five.
We talked about the safety competition earlier in hour number one, and Major Burns seems like he's had a nice start to camp here in running out there with the ones ahead of Joe Fuchsia alongside Jay Ward. What do you see on that defensive back end as far as guys that are in competition there and how deep they are?
That's been really interesting to see Major out there. Of course, he started 5 games last year before suffering the foot injury, and then was out all of spring as he continued to recover from that. But they brought in Joe as one of the guys who you thought, okay, he'll probably start because he's proven that he can start at Arkansas. I mean, another SEC team, and they were looking to reload in the secondary, bringing in guys like him and Greg Brooks and Jarek Bernard-Converse from Oklahoma State, et cetera. And Joe seemed like one of those guys who figured you could kind of pencil in as a starter, but that's probably a good sign that if Major's passing him up and getting those first team reps, that he's probably gotten even better since he was last year, and it's kind of a good sign for the depth that they have at safety. If Joe isn't even end up starting, and even if he does start, then you probably feel comfortable with Major if he has to come into the game too, because he looks really good out there. He's just has a presence about him in the back end that Brian Kelly mentioned. You can kind of see it. He's communicating well. He's coming up to make hits and plays in the box. We saw it a couple times at practice earlier this week. He looks like he's made a step forward here in his second year at LSU.
How about the competition at cornerback? Another position that I guess early on in Kelly's tenure at LSU, I say early on, just like back in month 1, he was probably looking at that spot saying, geez, man, we got to do some work here in the portal and get to recruiting. Now it seems like he's got a group that he trusts. What do you make of the competition on the outside?
It's interesting. It seems like probably Jarek Bernard-Converse is if not completely set, then very close to set at that wide field corner spot that they're calling them now. Wide field and short field corner is the terms that Brian Kelly's uses for that. And Jarek, they always saw him as a starter ever since he got here from Oklahoma State, and he's been pretty much running with the ones. But that other one seems pretty unsettled. Could it be Sevin Banks? They like him as a short field corner because of his physicality. Mekhi Garner brings a lot to that position, being 6'2", 217, but he's sort of been mixing in. And then there's, of course, the emergence of Colby Richardson. As if he isn't a starter, then probably rotates in during the year, which even if he's just doing that, it would be really impressive having jumped from McNeese State over the summer. Goes from 167 to 190 pounds, broke up a few passes intended for Kayshawn the other day, and that's not easy to do against Kayshawn. And so that's been impressive to see him. You don't want to make maybe too much of it yet just because, camp stars don't always turn into regular season starters or anything like that. But it's been impressive to see him. So they've got that group of 4 that they feel really good about. And then, even some freshmen coming on like Jalen Davis Robinson and LaTerrence Welch to, provide depth in that secondary at corner. And that's always been the concern here with those corners is you brought in some guys with experience through the transfer portal, but okay, if something happened, who's behind them? Do you trust any of them? And now they seem to trust those guys, which is key.
Who's the leading candidate for nickel right now?
Looks like Greg Brooks out of Arkansas. We saw Sage Ryan get some first team reps with the ones last week at nickel. And I was told, talking to some staffers, like, hey, Greg, Sage is pushing Greg right now, which is what you want to hear with Sage Ryan in year 2 after injuries, really kept hampering him during his freshman season. But, former 5-star there, you'd expect him to kind of break out at some point. And, he seems maybe that he's close, but Greg has that experience and, has proven himself in the SEC at this point. And he seems to probably be the starter at nickel.
Running back seems to be a position here early on that a lot of people are talking about. John Emery was the name going in, but other names are starting to pop here in the first couple of weeks at camp. What do you make of the competition there?
It's been interesting because, like you said, Emery was like the name all spring. Everybody talking about John Emery, and you could see it. Like he was running, he looked explosive. He was running through people instead of just trying to dodge them and get out of the way. And that was quite maybe a mindset shift from him. But Noah Cain seems to be maybe the first guy up, and then Armani Goodwin has probably passed him too. I mean, Armani was getting the majority of the first team reps at the open practice earlier this week, and he looked great with them too. Hitting the hole hard, getting upfield, low pad level. He's only like 5'8", but he's got such explosiveness. We saw him just run over Colby Richardson after catching a pass out of the backfield and score. They liked him a lot as a freshman, and he just had some injuries and couldn't really stay on the field. But now that he's healthy, he looks like he'll contribute. Brian Kelly had said that this would be kind of a running back by committee situation, but maybe the pecking order within that committee has changed a little bit since the spring.
Wilson, I know this is kind of forecasting, but how much different do you believe this team will look in week 4 than it does in week 1?
That's a great question. I haven't really considered it too much yet, frankly, but it'll probably look a good bit different because when you have a first-year coach like this and a first-year team, sometimes there's some growing pains, but there's usually the team usually looks pretty different by the end of the year than it does at the very beginning. Now, LSU will have by week 4 played, Florida State. That's going to be a decent measuring stick, even though FSU isn't the program that it has been in the past. And Mississippi State. The other 2 games aren't going to be as revealing with Southern and New Mexico State, but or I guess it's just New Mexico. But Mississippi State will tell you something, and then so will Florida State. And so, you're going to really probably see growth or change of some kind come October and into November in the meat of that SEC schedule.
Wilson, you've been on the beat for a while. You've covered programs. What do you make of Brian Kelly's relationship that he's building with the media? I find his communication to be very impressive, and obviously the access is something that, at least around here, has not been seen in a long time, if ever.
Yeah, I'm certainly appreciative personally that we've gotten to go to practices and see entire practices. Before this year, I'd never seen an entire college football practice start to finish, and it helps us do our job. And I think it helps the fans learn more about the team that they love because there's able to kind of see what's actually happening out on the field and who's playing well. And is this going to be the norm throughout his tenure? I'd still be probably surprised if he's able to opens things up that much. But certainly right off the bat here, he has done that, and it's been great in year one with LSU going through such a transformation culturally and in the building to be able to actually kind of see what that looks like and see how people respond to that on the field itself. And so it's been good here in year one, at least I think from our end, to be able to have that.
Wilson, take me back to the kicking position. This seems like a very a high area of concern, at least early on in camp. This is something that I guess LSU fans probably have taken for granted over the last 4 years because they played at such a consistent high level at the specialist spots. Run down all of them for me from the punters to the field goaler kickers to the place kickers. Where is this competition right now? Where's the confidence level, at least in the coaching staff, that you can pick up?
Yeah, I heard you talking about just how much of an advantage LSU has had a kicker yesterday. And I mean, think about it. You go from Cole Tracy to Cade York, and you're set. No worries at kicker for I guess a 4-year period here, which is such a luxury in college football when kickers at every level, but especially in college, aren't always money. LSU's had that, and now that's not the case. Punter is set with Jay Bramblett. You can hear the ball come off his leg well at practice. It's got that kind of boom that you want to hear out of a punt, and he'll be their starting punter. But place kicker could be one of 4 guys. Nathan Dybert, who's a freshman who has a really big leg. Greg McMahon recruited him out of high school and recommended him to LSU's new staff, and they honored that scholarship. They needed a kicker. But we haven't seen him take field goal reps during a practice yet. Off to the side maybe, but not during a full team period. First, I think we saw Ezekiel Mata last week, who's a walk-on who's been here for a little bit. He had like a 48-yarder actually during the spring game. That was kind of impressive. But then this past week, it was Damian Ramos, and he missed about a 38-yard field goal, but that was because of the snap from Slade Roy was low. And then there's Trey Finnison, who's a walk-on from Northwestern, but Trey has never actually kicked a field goal in a game. Oh. He was more of a kickoff specialist his freshman year, and so maybe they use him as that because they also need a kickoff specialist after Avery Atkins graduated and moved on. So I think there is some concern here because there's nobody who has emerged as a surefire option at kicker. And there just always happens to be a game or some point during the season where you got to have one, and they don't maybe seem to have that yet. Maybe someone will emerge and really end up playing well, but that's got to be a spot of concern at this point.
Jack Besh made his way back to the practice field yesterday. What does that do for the wide receiver rotation?
Yeah, we'll need to see how he kind of fits in because the first 3 maybe seems set with Jeray Jenkins, Malik Neighbors, and Kayshawn. But Kyron Lacey and Brian Thomas have sort of been jockeying for that sort of 4th and 5th receiver spot. And then when you add Jack into the mix with what he accomplished as a freshman, leading the team in receptions and having the year that he had, he's certainly a dynamic option, especially if you want to kind of play him out of the slot, but he can play on the outside as well. And so we'll need to see with him. He still didn't participate in like a full team period. He didn't seem completely full go. There was like some periods where the receivers went off and were doing drills, and Jack went off to the quarterbacks and was just catching passes on the side with the quarterbacks. So it seems like the shin splints. He's not like 100% back yet, but he's certainly getting closer, and he'll be in the mix there for that probably 4th, 5th receiver spot and some significant playing time once he's fully go.
Malik Neighbors feels like he's about to bust out, right?
Absolutely. My gosh, he's impressive. I just can't get over the strength of his hands because there's been so many plays since the spring and then now here in fall camp where there's a receiver draped all over his back and he's got his hands out. He gets him out way out in front of him. He doesn't let anything get to his body. And despite all the noise that's going on around him and, guys batting at his arms and stuff, he pulls the ball down. He's got great concentration, really quick cuts in short amounts of space. Creates great separation. There was just a slant route. Basic one-on-one about 2 weeks ago against Greg Brooks. Like we were talking about earlier, is a proven guy in the SEC, and it's just a slant route, and he creates like 3 or 4 yards of separation, takes off for a touchdown in that drill. And so he just looks like he's ready to pop in year 2, and that's so key for LSU to have that because teams are going to be focusing so much on Kayshawn, but they're not going to be able to ignore Malik Neighbors.
Wilson, our friends over at Caesars Sportsbook have LSU's win total tabbed at 7. If you were at the window, which way do you go, over or under?
I would go over. I've said 8-4 for most of the year, and so I guess I would take the over. I'm not an expert when it comes to betting at all. It's not my area of expertise in the slightest. But based on the fact that I think they'll go 8-4, I guess I would take the over.
Already getting emails. Wilson, you said to bet the over back in August on the Culotta show. I listened to you. Now my kid doesn't have Christmas. Harold Perkins.
I think that person would need to call the gambling hotline.
Right, they would. Harold Perkins, how impressive is he?
1-800-GAMBLER.
He's really impressive. He just looks so. The first day out there, before they were even in pads, he's standing next to Greg Penn, and Harold's 6'2", 220. He looks just as big as Greg, and Greg's been in the program for a year developing with the strength staff. Harold just gets here as a freshman, and he looks like he's ready to play already. He's got great sideline to sideline speed. Remember Brian Kelly saying he's got a suddenness about him when he's going to make a tackle that you just don't see in the rest of LSU's linebackers. He looks like, you could tell he was probably going to fit in some way into this linebacker rotation as a freshman, but that seems like that's absolutely going to happen here in year one. That Greg Penn and Mike still, I think, are still their starters there, but as they rotate, because we saw that they are going to use 3 linebackers sometimes, especially when you get into short yardage or like on the goal line, and maybe even sometimes in the middle of the field, frankly, because we saw that Matt House wants to be multiple, that Harold could be the guy that comes in to do that, because even though he's a freshman, he's picking things up fast, and physically he's already looks like he's there.
Wilson, so much has been made of obviously the quarterback debate about who's going to start between Nussmeier and Jaden Daniels, but I feel like because of that conversation, we haven't focused a lot on what the offensive scheme actually looks like from Mike Denbrock. Have you seen anything in practice or in any of the scrimmages where what LSU is trying to do offensively?
A little bit. It's not like a revolutionary offensive scheme like when you think back to 2019 and everybody was talking about the RPO and trying to figure out what that was. They're going to run RPO, especially with Jaden. They like what he's able to do with that because of his legs. But we also, interestingly enough, seen them go under center a few times. Mike Denbrock said back in the spring that they would do that occasionally. So they'll work out of center, sometimes out of the shotgun. You're just not going to go, you're not going back under center and going, with a fullback and going, like power right down the middle. But they want to have a physical run game. We've seen some pulling guards, kicking guys out. There was a really good run, earlier this week where Armani Goodwin, they had a pulling guard coming through the right side and broke open a huge hole for Armani, and he took advantage of that. So a lot of 3 wide receiver sets, some 11 personnel as well. I know these are just kind of throwing in a lot of like terms, but that's kind of what we've seen so far is, so kind of your basic modern offense in some ways, but they'll run RPO and try to be pretty quick in the passing game. And they're not like super hurry up from what we've seen in practice, but try to maintain some tempo as they're going along.
Wilson, one from a listener before we get you out of here, asking about Micah Baskerville and what you have seen from him and what the expectation is for him here in his final year.
Mike is a particularly interesting player under Brian Kelly because, he was a starter basically for the last 2 years and played fairly well, certainly at times. And yet he had to kind of work his way back up the depth chart and, all those standards that Kelly talks about with, what they want academically and off the field and all that. Mike kind of had to meet some of those expectations under this new staff and work his way back up the depth chart. And, he's not really getting talked about in the rest of those linebacker room, but Brian Kelly's been insistent on he's going to play. And, he has mentioned that, been sort of complimentary of Micah really since like May, and said mentioned him as a guy, and sometimes gone out of his way to mention him as somebody who's doing the right things off the field in order to play on the field. And they know what they have in Micah because of what he's done the last few years, and he's going to be in the mix in this linebacker rotation. Brian Kelly mentioned that, I think it was last week, that Micah's going to be in this. Even if he isn't a starter, he's going to certainly rotate in at linebacker.
Thank you, buddy. There's Wilson Alexander checking in this morning here, going into the weekend. Make sure and read his work online at theadvocate.com, and you can also follow him on social media at WHAlexander_. We'll talk soon, man. Enjoy the weekend.
Thanks for having me, Jordy. Good luck with the spray paint.
Thank you. Thank you.